This week we continue work on designing your blended class, and I want to take a few minutes to talk about blended learning and 8 questions that you might want to ask. These questions come from the book How to Design and Teach a Hybrid Course by Jay Caulfield. The first question that you want to ask is, what is it that students must demonstrate they know by the time they have successfully completed the course? Hopefully this has already been designed. You already know this. Those course level objectives, measurable course level objectives. Then also, I hope you have already broken down your course into modules or units, and that you have module level objectives that link back to those course level objectives. And then you have assessment activities that usually take place at the module level, because what happens, the course level objectives are what they should know at the completion of the course. The module level objectives are what they should be able to do at the completion of the module. So you may have a higher level course objective than your module level objectives because they have to start at the beginning and work their way through, so that the module level objectives increase in level in what you're expecting the student to do as they progress through the course. Your module level objectives should link to your course level objectives. Question 2, what learning activities could students actively engage in to achieve identified learning objectives? These can be your assessments, those higher point assignments, exams, projects that you give students to complete. This includes your instructional materials, your textbooks, your instructor notes, videos, and so forth, your publisher materials, any YouTube videos you might find that help explain the concept, internet research, TED Talks, Khan Academy, just a whole host of sources that you can use. And then the learning activities, your self-assessments that let students determine, did I really understand it, quizzes, homework, and so forth. These are usually those low or no point activities that encourage students to practice their skill. I like to make them low point activities because often if they have no point value attached to them, the students will not do them. Your third question is, how will the face-to-face and time out of class components be integrated into a single course? What are you going to do in the face-to-face part? What will students do online or outside of class? Here's the big piece of this. How will you make the connection between the two for the students? What they do outside of class has to connect to what they do inside of class. One of the things you can do to help determine this is ask yourself to think of a problem encountered when teaching traditionally and determine whether a hybrid format would help solve that problem. For example, you say students don't read. Well, can I use the hybrid format to encourage students to read? Give them the assignment, have them do a discussion on the reading, have them complete self-assessment activities, things like that outside of class so that they're better prepared when they get to class. Students won't discuss. Maybe they'll discuss in the online environment. They seem to get it in class, but then they cannot solve the problem out of class. Maybe flip it. Maybe have them, you give them the lecture, you have them practice it with your lecture, and then bring them in class and put them in groups or put them on the board solving a problem or doing whatever it is. Students always struggle with the concept of, how are they struggling with that concept? What kind of activities could you bring to the class to help them with that? Can you introduce it, send them outside the class to do some initial research, get some basic knowledge, maybe have some discussions, and then bring them back into the class to take that to another level? Question 4, how will characteristics of your class influence your design? How often are you going to see your students? What kind of activities can you do in the face-to-face class with the time allotted for class? That might be key in what you choose to do. How can students best prepare to make the most out of the class time you have them with them? That's going back to those readings and self-assessments and things, maybe outside discussions, so they're ready to have a more in-depth discussion once they come into your classroom. Question 5, how will you divide the percentage of time students spend in class and out of class? And how will you schedule the in-class time in relation to the out-of-class time? There are a lot of methods that can be used, and no one works for every class because every discipline, every class, every instructor's strengths are different. But you might consider, read your material, do the assignment, time yourself, and then multiply whatever time it took you by 1.5 or 2, and then assume students will spend that amount of time in order to complete the assigned work. So if it took me 30 minutes to read it and an hour to do the work, then I'm looking at an hour and a half it took me, so it could take students 2.5 to 3 hours to do the work. Then let students know what is going to be done in the face-to-face class and what is going to be done out of class. And then finally, try to keep the total time needed to complete the work between 2 to 2.5 times the number of credits for the course. So if you're going to have a 3-credit course, try to keep your total required time for students between 6 and 7.5 hours, including in-class time. Tell this to students up front. Question 6, how might you lessen the likelihood of creating a course with an excessive workload? Remember the total amount of time needed each week for the course and try to keep your workload around that. Don't add additional work or content just because it's blended and you have all this wonderful space that you can put stuff online. And then finally, making sure all of your activities relate to the objectives. That's so very important. Question 7, how will you effectively communicate? What will occur during class and out of class? Consider you're using your schedule for that. Notice that in this schedule that I got from the author, this is the face-to-face component for October 15th. On October 22nd, they're having a virtual class. So they're doing this all outside of class, but these are assignments as well. So, this is they're prepared to do when they come to class. So consider maybe something like that. And then question 8, how will you develop social presence in your hybrid class? Are you going to have in-class groups? You're going to do online groups? You're going to do discussions? You're going to do projects? How are you going to have that social presence so students get to know each other and begin to develop that soft skill with the social soft skills?